to my. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our very special event, Ask Us Anything Nonprofit Websites Edition. This has been an event. We have been planning this for a while, so I'm really excited to finally be here. And also, I've been collecting questions for a really long time. So I feel like I have read so many great questions from everybody. I see a lot of people are joining us. I'm sure many more are going to watch the recording too. Hopefully, we can get to as many questions as possible. But yeah, with that in mind, as always, if you've been to one of my webinars before, you know that I like to start on the dot. So I'm ready to go. What do you think, David?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
All right, so first I'll just introduce myself quickly. I am the marketing director at MemoryFox. My name's Carly Euler. I previously worked at several nonprofits before this, before I came to MemoryFox, and I decided to come to MemoryFox because I really felt like the positions where I worked previously, I loved the storytelling aspect of my work, and I felt like if I could find a role where I could help hundreds of missions tell better stories, that seemed like the perfect role for me. So that's why I came to MemoryFox. And if anybody has any questions about MemoryFox, let me know towards the end or in the chat. We can definitely discuss that. But I'd love to introduce David. David, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm David Hartstein. I'm one of the co-founders here at Wired Impact, and we help nonprofits build websites. We used to be much more of a traditional agency. I've been helping organizations with their websites since 2009, and over the last handful of years, transitioned to be more of a subscription service. So software that helps small to mid-sized nonprofits get the most out of their websites.
Oh, I love that. I know we'll get into this obviously, but I personally, when I am looking at a nonprofit to donate to or volunteer with or just to know more about, if their website, if it's not easy to navigate or if it's not something where I can kind of quickly tell where I can find their mission, their vision, their donation page, I'm out.
Yep. Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I'm not going to be a part of it, right? Okay. Then we're on the same page to start off. Just so everybody knows, just a few logistics for today. This is going to be a 60-minute session. It's going to be Ask Me Anything style. So a lot of you gave us your questions in registration. We've read through them. We have talked them over. We're going to discuss as many as we can today. But I do want to say if you have new questions or you want a clarification of something that we're talking about, please do drop those in the chat. We will work with those as we go. And the most common question I get in any webinar is, are you recording? So I want to say right now, I am recording, and you will all receive a copy via email from me after the event. And then, of course, if you have any questions, like I said, about MemoryFox or about Wired Impact, the work that David does with his actual customer, with his clients, we'd love to connect with you afterwards. In fact, we are partners, so we do have some really fun things that we can offer each other in terms of people that already work with MemoryFox or people that already work with Wired Impact. But we can talk about that more at the end. I think we have a lot of questions, so I'd really love to get to them. And once I get back to my screen, there we go. Okay. You know, I have two screens, but it sometimes feels like I could have four or five and
I know
it
exactly
would
what you
still
mean. Yeah,
not be
where'd that
enough.
tab go? Right.
All right. So like I said, drop your questions in the chat, but let's get started. Okay. Great question right off the top. This question came from our friend Lindsay. Lindsay said, how can we update or make sure our website is compliant without an on-staff developer or IT team? That is a really great question. And I think especially one that is probably coming into play more and more often, as we're seeing more AI being used for things, as we're seeing scams popping up everywhere. What would you say to somebody like Lindsay who has a question like this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lindsay. And I love that we're starting talking about compliance. I'm going to sort of read this as specifically talking about compliance from an accessibility
Oh,
standpoint.
yes.
But if
We
if
get a lot of
if you
questions
meant
about
something else, Lindsay,
accessibility.
definitely let me know because we can talk about security compliance. We can talk about um, some legal compliance related stuff, although that's not my area of expertise. But when we think about accessibility, typically we sort of trim that conversation to what's called WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's an international set of guidelines that governs accessibility and gives a bunch of recommendations and best practices. It has different levels of compliance. Generally, we're shooting for what's called AA compliance when it comes to accessibility. So a little bit of sort of like theme setting here. But when we talk about how to actually make your website compliant, some of it's going to depend on the foundation that you're building on top of. So how recent is the technology powering your website? If it's older, you might be talking about building a new website to get it fully compliant, but there's still a lot of best practices that you can put into practice without needing to write any code whatsoever. So first thing that I recommend is don't put text in your images.
Oh
Pull
my gosh.
text out of
Yes.
images, right? Yes, yes, yes. And this is not only compliance from an accessibility standpoint, but it's also just better for visitors that are browsing on
Mhm.
different devices. You've probably had this experience where you're on your phone, you go to a website, and there's some text in an image that you can't read. You're zooming in and like scrolling around on your phone. You can avoid all that by pulling that text out of your images, put it within the actual page itself. It's also
Raise your
great from an
hand.
accessibility
Give me a
standpoint.
thumbs up if you have put text in an image before and you have regretted it. Okay, that is me. And
Totally.
I when I learned that that was something that was tough. I mean, it seems so obvious after you make that when once you first realize that, but yes, no text and images. I love it.
Yes, so that's an easy win. Another one is when you're thinking about images, including what's called alt text or
Oh,
alternative text for images. So this is basically what will display if the image can't load, if someone is on a slow connection or something like that. And also what a screen reader can actually read to someone who has a visual impairment and can't see the image. So you can actually convey the meaning of the image with written content instead of with the actual a picture itself. And so the way you do this is going to vary a little bit depending on your system, but generally if you click on the image there will be a way to add alt text in the back end of your website. um, the type of alt text that you add actually varies a little bit depending on the context. I actually just posted about this on LinkedIn today. We have like a flow chart people can use to figure
oh,
out what type of alt text is going to be most useful in different
right, because
situations.
I believe like the what I've been trained is to think that alt text is very beneficial for SEO purposes. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but is
Yeah.
that one of your options that you would recommend?
So it definitely can be a signal for SEO. Generally, the types of images where you're not going to include alt text are the types of images that are just sort of they don't convey information. They're literally just there for like visual benefit. They're
Yeah.
not actually conveying information to your visitor. And so they're just decorative. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
They're just purely decorative. So those types of images aren't as crucial generally for SEO. Um, yeah, someone actually asked about this on the LinkedIn post, and we talked a little bit about the implications for SEO. But speaking of SEO, one other tip related to accessibility is actually use your headings in the order that they're supposed to be used. So you should really only have one heading one on the page. That's the title of the page. And then, drop down to your heading two styles, drop down to heading three styles. If you're jumping around, let's say you like the look of your heading four the most. So you use that right after your heading one. It gets really confusing for people that navigate using assistive devices because that can actually serve as a table of contents for the
Mhm.
page. And so you want to use just that, it's called a hierarchical heading structure, but just your H2, then your H3, and then H4 if you need to. And then if you start a new topic, go back to your heading two style and just use that to basically
I
bring
love
some
that tip. I have
architecture to the
never
page.
heard that tip before, and that is 100% true.
Yep,
That's an
absolutely.
easy thing people can update too. You can just go back and make sure that you have the things in, your heading order. I think that makes total sense. I love that.
Yep. Yeah,
Huh.
totally. I'm going to just name a couple other super quick hits. We don't
Okay.
need to talk about accessibility too much. We're going to talk about it a little bit more too, but I don't want to spend all of our time talking about this. A couple other very quick hits. Don't overly format your text. Just use bold, capitalization, italics sort of sparingly.
Yeah.
Use descriptive link text, also good for SEO, but instead of click here, just tell people what they will get on the other side of the click. That
Smart.
is definitely better for accessibility as well. Captioning your videos or pulling out a transcript from your videos and actually putting it on the page, really good for accessibility. And then also just turn off autoplay on any videos.
Oh, great
It's
tip.
super annoying for visitors, but also really can, if someone is using a screen reader to read your website and a video starts playing audio on top of that, it can be really difficult for them to navigate your site. So generally
Wow.
speaking, just get rid of autoplay. We actually have a resource I can share. I can drop it in the chat. It's all about some
Sure.
like these content related tips that you can put into practice on
Oh, I
your
love it. And we can add
organization's
that in the
website.
follow-up email too, because that,
Cool.
yeah, yeah, there is nothing that I find more abrasive than when a video is auto-playing when I'm just trying to read something.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. Yeah, totally.
I didn't come here to listen to a video, or maybe not yet. Maybe I'm trying to read.
That's
That's
right.
true.
Exactly.
I love that. Wow. Okay, already really great tips. And yeah, those are all things that make sense for several things, including compliance. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, next question came from Anna. And this is such a great question. So Anna is wondering how to make a user-friendly FAQ. What are the best practices to making your site multilingual? Okay, so those are kind of two separate questions, but let's talk about the FAQ first. So something that's really user-friendly and easy to navigate.
Yep. Yep. Totally. This is one of the most common questions we get from our clients, actually. FAQs are really popular. Makes sense. And when we're talking about FAQs, we're talking about frequently asked questions.
Hmm?
And so there's kind of two ways you can go about this. One we recommend, one we generally don't. So the way that we don't recommend doing this is creating one FAQ page and just listing every question you can think of on that page.
Hmm.
Typically speaking, those pages get really low traffic, really low engagement, and a lot of people exit from that page. They go there, they get overwhelmed, and they leave. So, what we typically recommend doing is, well, first of all, try to answer a lot of common questions in the content itself. So, if you're writing page content about a particular topic, just ask yourself who is the page for and what questions will they have? What are some common objections they might bring with them
Right.
related to this topic, and then try and answer those directly within the content. But if you're going to pull out some common objections and put them in some sort of easily scannable format, generally what we recommend doing is creating an accordion section. It can work really, really well. So basically, have a heading for frequently asked questions, maybe tee it up with a sentence of context, and then have each question be expandable
Right.
so that someone can click on the question that interests them. It opens up, you give them an answer, and then they can close it. They can move on to another question. Um, that typically helps you avoid just that giant list of frequently asked questions. And the other sort of tip we have about FAQs is embed them within the relevant page
Right.
instead of creating that standalone FAQ page. Let's say you have a particular program or a service that you offer. Put the FAQs about that program and use the actual questions that you get asked all the time. You probably have a handful of questions that your program participants are asking you. Use their language, write it using their actual verbiage on the page, and then keep your answer as short as you possibly
Oh,
can
yes.
and link people to additional content if they want to dive deeper. So that's typically how we recommend approaching
I love
FAQs.
that. I think that that's such a, yeah, when making sure that your copy, when you're talking about an answer to a question, having that be so concrete and just something that it does actually just quickly answer the question, that's what people are looking for. So
Yeah,
it can be very tempting to like want to like re-explain everything about your program or re-explain like everything that you've ever done maybe at your nonprofit. But if it truly is a frequently asked question, there's got to be a frequent answer, right? So let's just give them the answer.
that's right.
And then let's talk about the second part of this question. So, what are some best practices with making your site multilingual? Is that something that you get asked pretty often?
It is a conversation that definitely comes up, especially for organizations that are serving a diverse audience. So, where I recommend starting is getting really clear on what needs to be translated or presented in multiple languages. So
Mhm.
sometimes it is truly the entire website needs to be presented in multiple languages. Other times it's just some key resources or specific maybe program related information that is the sort of like one program that serves multiple audiences. And so starting with just the sort of scope of um, the content that needs to be presented in multiple languages can help ground the conversation.
Mhm.
If it's just some resources, say some like PDFs or something like that, you can just have downloadable versions in different languages. And it can make that can make sense if your primary audience kind of all speaks the same language, but they themselves are serving, maybe some. Uh, I mean, it usually comes up for us in English speaking, but it doesn't have to be. But basically, if they're serving an audience that doesn't speak the same language that you're writing your content in, you could just have resources downloadable for
Oh
them.
yeah, we get that a lot too with our storytelling, with our story collection
I
tool,
bet.
because we get people who are um maybe the office is based in America, but the communities that they serve might be in South America. So then they
Yeah.
are saying, okay, well, I need, my website, this part of my website that is about our programs or about um kind of the way that the programs work needs to be multilingual, but maybe traditionally their donors are English speaking and maybe they don't have to focus on switching that over just yet. Or
Yep.
um so would you say that maybe once you get kind of a scope of how exactly what you maybe need to start working on first, what would be kind of the first step of actually doing that? How does that work? I
So
don't.
it, yeah, well, so assuming that you do truly need to translate a large section of the website or the majority of the site, there's kind of two ways you can go about it. You can either use an automatic translation tool or a manual translation tool. Um, and as the name implies, automatic is going to be a lot easier, but it's going to be written by a computer. So
Right.
think of like a Google Translate or something like that. So the way it works, you write in your native language, and then the computer does its
Right.
thing and translates it to another language. Obviously, you've probably seen a website that was translated in this
Right.
way, and you can usually tell. So that's the downside, is that it's not going to be written as if a native speaker wrote it. It's generally not going to sound sort of exactly like your tone. You just lose a lot of the control in that way. But essentially, you can just kind of hook a tool like a Google Translate into your website, has a drop down for languages that are
Mhm.
available, and people can pick it.
Well,
I
that's
also want to
nice
mention
that
on
there's
the
that option though, right? If you maybe aren't able to employ somebody to specifically work on that,
totally,
maybe just yeah, I mean that is nice that you can have the option to at least have an automatic that will hopefully get you what you need at least right now. That's
totally.
great for nonprofits.
Yeah, it's a great starting point for a lot of organizations. You can also see some of this in your website analytics. You can see what language people have set in their browsers. So
Yeah.
that can be an illuminating way to see how much traffic you're getting from people who speak another language other than what you've written your site in. Um, the other piece I do like to mention about automatic translation is a lot of modern browsers actually have this functionality built directly into them. So you've probably seen this where you go to a website written in another language and it says, would you like to translate this
Yeah.
into whatever default language you have set in your browser? So less and less you even have to think about this if you're doing automatic translation because a lot of modern browsers will take care of it. Um, Manual translation is definitely possible. It is a much bigger undertaking. It's going to be a
Right.
lot more expensive, both in terms of the cost of the tools themselves, also more expensive just in the maintenance and the time that you're putting in
Right, because
because
when you update your original page, it's not going to
that's right.
automatically update. You'd have to go back and update, your other pages as well if you do it that way.
Right. Right. Well, and some tools will sort of do an automatic first pass and then you can go in and overwrite. But you're exactly right. I mean, the whole point of manual translation is you're writing it as a native speaker or having someone write it as a native speaker. And so, generally speaking, if you make, let's say you publish a new page or you update a page, you're going to have to go make those updates in all the different languages that you have available. So, Generally, what I recommend is starting with automatic translation, unless you really need manual translation, just as a way to move quickly, get the website up, and then you can always introduce more complexity, and in this case, manual translation down the road.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Let us know in the chat if anybody here has dabbled in multilingual websites or web pages, or maybe like David mentioned, like just even a resource or something. Let us know how that's worked for you, because I would love to hear. I don't know if I have personally like worked with somebody that's done that, so that's really intriguing to me. But while we're getting all those answers in the chat, what do you think about we have a question that it's sort of a broad question when it comes to all nonprofits, but in terms of nonprofit websites, the question is, how can we get more donations? So I'm going to make an assumption that what we're asking here is where on my website should my donation page be? How am I going to make sure people know where to donate? How am I going to make sure people are finishing their donation and actually sending that money to me? What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, you're right. It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, if
Have a
we knew how to get every nonprofit more donations, I mean, what would we be doing here today, right?
That's,
That would
I mean,
be
that's what we're working on, right? That's what we're trying to do with a lot of websites. And honestly, one of the things that comes to mind for me is compelling stories are a
right.
huge part. And so I'm sure, Carla, you'll have some thoughts on that piece.
Yeah.
But so in terms of the website, a few things sort of jump out to me. First is just getting really clear on sort of why someone would give to your cause. I know it sounds simple, but just what is that one or two sentence explanation for why someone would give? Because you want to make sure that you have that sort of consistent messaging, that consistent story that you can thread throughout your whole website. Because it really is a journey. Like very few people land on your website, go immediately to your donation page, and make a gift that day. It's exceedingly rare that
Yes.
someone does that. And so the more that you can really tie that sort of cohesive narrative throughout your entire website, the more likely it is, no matter what page someone lands on, no matter what brought them to the website or how they arrived on the site, they're going to get involved. So that's one place to start. Like I said, compelling stories are huge. And Carly, I'll let you talk about that piece more than I will. But yeah, do you want to do that
Sure,
now?
sure.
Okay.
I will say that so okay, so inherently, we all know that we like to listen to stories, right? I mean, when we're talking about just everyday life, it's estimated that like 70% of our conversations are storytelling. And I guess I don't even know what the other 30% would be, just yes and no answers maybe. But
Yeah.
this is how people communicate. So it's really important to let people understand your mission through the vision of one person that you've served and how they can extrapolate that into being a much bigger long-term solution for the larger community. That's something that people really can understand and that people really feel compelled to donate to. So, in terms of how that is going to help donations or your donate page,
Mhm.
there was actually a study that was done by Classy, and they said that when on their donation page, so Classy is a fundraising platform where they help you create donation pages, and they found that their pages that had videos embedded in them were 114% more likely to get donations. So they were 114% is a big, big amount to consider putting a video on your donation page. That is something, that they have proven. So just as a general rule, I would say your donation page really needs to include at the very least an image, maybe at the even very least a quote that says something about why your mission is helpful and somebody that's been impacted by your mission. And honestly, it doesn't even have to come from a program participant. It can come from your founder about why they founded your organization, maybe the first client that they served, maybe the reason that they decided to make a nonprofit. There's a lot of kind of snippet stories that you can put on a donation page and really, of course, throughout your website. But if we're talking specifically about donations, it is proven that that being on your website is going to help you raise more funds. Yeah.
Yep, those are fantastic.
Yeah.
I totally endorse everything Carly's talking about. Couple other very quick sort of tactical tips on how to streamline or optimize your site for donations. So one, strong calls to action on popular pages. Just really think about the way that you can essentially meet a visitor where they're at and get them to the most logical next step in their journey. In this case, potentially that is making a donation. And then, like Carly said, don't assume just because they're on your donation page, they have decided to give. It's still, you want to talk about why someone would support you and make
Yeah.
that compelling case on the
I think
donation page itself.
that is such a good point, especially what you were saying about CTAs. I see sometimes, um, unless I would say unless your campaign that you're currently running is super hyper specific to whatever you're raising funds for. Sometimes I see on social media that nonprofits will um, ask for donations and then they'll just have their donate page be the link. And I do think that that can work sometimes, but then we're assuming that everybody that's come to see your post already knows about your mission and they already understand what you do. So that's what you were basically getting at, David, right? Like it's people are going to want to know, okay, well, what exactly is the mission? What's the vision? And then why do I want to give or do I feel compelled to give? So sometimes just going automatically to having people click that donation page and then at the top it's just that form where people need to be like filling out stuff. That might not be the best strategy. So you might want to consider if that's something you do, maybe consider a little change in that.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. One other tip about donation forms, really streamline that form as much as you
Yeah.
can. Cut any field you don't need. You can always get more information about donors after they've given, but every field you add is going to decrease the percentage of visitors that submit that form. And so streamlining that form as much as you possibly can is going to be huge.
Totally. I
It can
mean,
be
think
really
about
helpful. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, think about your own as a consumer. Think about the way that you
That's right.
purchase things. And you were probably going to go there, but I know that if I see an ad on Instagram and it's something that I'm already interested in, and then I go to their website and they take Shop Pay or Venmo or PayPal, I'm like, done. I'm already
Done.
purchasing it because I don't have to enter anything to do that.
That's right. No, it's just reducing friction. I know we have a couple of questions about that in the docket, but just really thinking about ways to reduce that friction along, we call them conversion paths, but that journey that your visitor is taking to that point of conversion, taking that meaningful action
That's
to the
very
extent that you
website
can.
jargon of you.
I
Conversion.
know, but we're trying to strip it out. So when we talk about conversion paths, we're just talking about from where they start to where they take action on your site.
No, I
The
love
less
it.
friction or kind of like bumps in the road that you can have, the better, generally speaking.
Definitely. All right, let's see what we got here. Let's see. Okay, let's skip ahead to a question here from our friend Barb. So Barb said, how should quotes about a program be added to the website? Part of an accordion, maybe its own header. So this is sort of a visual question and maybe where people's eyes might be drawn to something on a web page. What would
Yep.
be your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah. So a couple quick thoughts here. So we are big fans of placing quotes essentially on the most relevant page. And so, maybe you have like Carly was just saying, you have quotes about your program or about your founding story. If you have a program related quote, put it right on the program page or on the form where someone is filling out information to apply for the programs. Just those sort of contextual pages are great ways to sprinkle in. Again, website jargony term for it is social proof, but just
Yeah,
basically the idea that people are influenced by the actions of others around them. And so if you have a quote talking about how amazing this program is or how much it sort of was a springboard for someone changing their trajectory of their life, like that's going to be so meaningful to someone who is considering taking that action themselves. So putting it within the page is great. You can potentially put this on impact pages or pages related to supporting your organization. We just talked about your donation page, but get involved pages, volunteer pages, things like that. You can put them on mission and vision pages. You can also put them on thank you pages as a way to just kind of like reinforce. Someone makes a donation, they go to a thank you page.
yeah.
You could put some quotes from your program participants just to help them really connect the dots on the action that they just took in supporting your cause. And, obviously some ethical considerations there,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I can let Carly speak to more than
Yeah,
myself.
sure.
But
So I would say in terms of you've really touched on something that we are expanding more here at MemoryFox, and that is the idea of of giving someone an option to do something after they've made a donation in terms of
Hmm.
connecting with a story and also submitting their own story. So
Great.
most of the time when someone has decided to make a donation to your nonprofit, there is one specific reason, and it's maybe a connection to your mission. I mean, there's many reasons why that could be, but it usually is one thing to that one person. So wouldn't it be great if when they donate, they then went in, even just to type a quick quote for you that said, um, I am so inspired by this part of your mission because, this was a disease that touched my family, my grandmother, for example. Or maybe this is something that I've personally seen in my community and I'm ready for change to happen, something like that. These are things that, these are stories that are less people don't consider as often in terms of collecting them and sharing them. But these are stories that we maybe hear all the time, right? Especially if you are a fundraiser, you always are hearing about why people are thinking about your mission as being the cause that they're giving to. So, gosh, I don't know. I think I strayed a little bit from the initial question, but
No.
I think this is a really good point though, because oh, I remember what I was getting at. You were saying that giving somebody something to do after we were talking already about how to get more donations. And studies have
Yep.
shown that when you give someone an activity and they take the opportunity to do that activity, like share their story or like reply to an email or comment on a social post, they're more likely to give again in the future. So this is an action that they've taken in between giving, and now they're going to hopefully give again. So when you're putting that on your website and you're making that a part of their journey or a part of the really the conversion process, that's another form of a conversion.
Yep.
This is a really great way that people are going to want to give again because they're going to feel extra connected to your mission.
Yep. I love it.
Love
And
it.
Carla, you actually brought this up before, but it's even better when you're sharing uh, in this case, a testimonial or a quote, if it is styled in a way that does stand out a little bit. And
Yeah.
so it'll obviously depend on what you have going on with your website. You might be able to use some heading style. Even just bolding it can be better than nothing. And if you have a way and permission to share a name, share a photo of
Yeah.
the person the quote is coming from, those can also be really effective ways to just connect people a little bit more to the quote itself and humanize the
Yeah,
content.
definitely. And we get asked a ton about, well, what do I do if the people I serve have sensitive stories that that they are not able to share? Like they want to be left anonymous. And there are ways to share their quotes too. And, of course, you can remove the identifying factors. That's something that a lot of nonprofits do just in general. But
Yep.
in terms of sharing an image, if they do want to remain anonymous, you don't have to share the image of the person that's sharing the quote. You can show your mission in action and show that that is something that the image is conveying, right? So this is the way that the program works, and here's an image that's sort of conveying how that quote is saying that. And there is no requirement that that be the person that says the quote. Um,
Yeah, I
you
love
don't
that.
want to lead people astray and make them believe that that's the person in the quote. I'm simply saying that if you have an image or a video that is conveying something that doesn't have the actual person in it, that is okay, and it's actually an ethical way to tell stories anonymously.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great tip.
All right, moving right along. We have so many great questions here. Let's see here. This one is about, okay, this is interesting one. How about this question came from Jenna. Jenna said, "What does the ideal menu bar look like? How many first level items? How many layers is too many? We offer several options to donate financially. Is having them listed under the how to get involved main option?" Okay, so these are some specific questions about Jenna's website, but oh, in general, that's probably something that your team works really hard on, right? Like making sure the menu bar is something that is very easy to navigate and people can find exactly what they're looking for kind of in the right spot. So what would be your what would you say your ideal menu bar looks like?
Oh, you are not wrong. This is something that we spend a lot of time nerding out
Yeah.
on because it is so important. I mean, the way that I think about navigation and websites in general is Your website is essentially a choose your own adventure story, but you don't know what page someone is going to land on. You don't know who they are, what context they're bringing with them, but you still have to meet them where they're at and get them to where they're trying to go. And your navigation is one of, if not the most important way to get them there. So I love this question. We actually had quite a few questions about navigation. So hopefully this ticks a bunch of the boxes that folks sent in. So in terms of the number of items in your navigation, there's no right answer. Generally, somewhere between 5 and 8 is going to be what most organizations do. It's going to depend on the design of your website and the length of each page, the
Right.
title of each page. Now, the thing to remember here, sort of the guiding principle here, is everything you add to your navigation is going to take attention away from everything else that's already there. So the point is not to get all of your important pages in the navigation. The point is to just provide sort of a structure, an organizational structure to your visitors' experience finding the content that they're looking for. And so I think that mental reframe is helpful because a lot of people say, like, oh, this is a really important page. It has to go in the main navigation. I would really caution you away from that way of thinking and really think, okay, what's the most logical way that these pages fit together, sort of like a moving puzzle that will allow people to find what they're looking for. And a lot of the way that your sort of navigation is going to come together is going to be dictated by the size of your website and sort of the relationship between the types of pages that you're putting
Mhm.
together. So essentially what you're trying to do with your navigation is create the big buckets of content that your pages sort of fit within. And we actually have a resource. I can share this. Just give me a second to track it down. We have a resource that is essentially like prototypical website structures. So we have, I think there's 8 or so that can serve as a starting point for you if you're putting together a navigation. So if you have a bunch of programs, there's a starting point. If you have a bunch of, or if you have one main program, if you do a bunch of research, we have different sort of starting points that we've seen work really well. But you're going to want to customize this to your
Right.
audience. You're going to want to customize this to your organization. Um, a couple of other notes about navigation. Generally, don't recommend sort of what are called flyout menus. You've probably seen these where you hover over a navigation item and a drop down shows up, which is great. But if you roll over an item, sometimes you'll see a menu sort of fly out to the
Yeah.
side that you have to like try and get over and
Right.
stay
Make
within.
sure your mouse is exactly where it's got to go.
They're so frustrating. Right, exactly. You have to make sure your mouse is perfectly aligned or they disappear. They're also a lot of times really difficult to navigate
Hmm.
for visitors with disabilities. And so, generally speaking, we caution folks very strongly away from using flyout menus. We don't use any of them in the themes that we develop. If you need, a lot of times we think about website navigation as a family tree. So, your parent pages are what are up in the navigation. Child pages are subpages of those. Grandchild pages are underneath your child pages. If you need your navigation to show parent, child, and grandchild pages, you can use what's called a mega menu,
Ooh,
which
sounds
you
fun.
have absolutely seen these on websites. When you hover over it, basically a big rectangular menu
Oh,
opens
yeah,
and
yeah.
it has
Mhm.
subheadings. It has all your child pages and grandchild pages listed out. Um, I can look for an example. Oh, I actually know a client that uses this. I can grab an example
Okay.
really quick and drop it in the chat if folks want to see an example of a mega menu. Let me see if I can do this and
I
talk at
have
the same time.
definitely seen those before.
Yeah,
Especially when, well, no, I'll wait. I'll wait. I'll wait for that. But
yeah. So here's an example of a mega menu from one of our clients, the Clinton School of Public Service. And you can see if you roll over their navigation,
oh, yes, I see
it's a pretty
here.
big
Okay.
menu that opens up, but it does bring a lot of structure to how you navigate their site. Generally, these are going to be more necessary as your site gets larger. So don't worry about having a mega menu if your site is pretty streamlined to start. We actually recommend keeping your site as streamlined as we possibly can. Um, Oh,
Got
let
it.
me
I
drop
got
it.
it.
Here, yep, I will drop that link. I had to change my chat settings here. Okay, thanks, Kyle. Um, and yeah, basically, you want to try to um, keep your site as streamlined as you possibly can initially. You can always add new pages. You can always add more complexity down the road. Um, the other piece I think in here was about like listing giving options
Mhm.
in the
Right. Like, should I list them all, in the parent menu? Should I, should it be considered a parent page? Should it be should it be within a page? What do you think about that?
yeah. Typically, I wouldn't recommend listing all the different ways to give directly in your navigation. It probably will get overwhelming for visitors. Depends a
Right.
little bit on the number of options, but generally speaking, some of it will also depend on the tools that you use to accept donations. But typically, what I recommend is have a kind of primary donation page and embed your most common donation form there. For a lot of folks, this is going to be a way that you can accept credit cards and maybe some digital wallets, like a Venmo or a PayPal, where people can toggle different ways to make a donation. And then you can link people from that page to some other ways to give. So, if someone wants to donate stock or give using a donor advised fund or planned giving or something like that, they can easily find that from your donation page, as opposed to putting, all of the 5 or 6 different ways to donate directly in the navigation, which could get a little bit overwhelming for folks.
That is so true. I think that can be overwhelming. Okay, I have a follow-up question, and
Yep.
I think someone asked it, but I can't find exactly who asked it at this point. But my question is, when you're thinking about structuring your website, especially like the menu, how would you recommend? So a website for most nonprofits serves two purposes, right? And one is for donors to view it and make donations and learn about your nonprofit, and the other is likely to perform some portion of your mission to actually collect applications for a program or scholarship fund or something along those lines. What sort of tips would you have for somebody who is trying to, use one website to do kind of really two completely different things?
It's so hard.
It's
So
it's hard. It is hard.
it's the most common and most challenging way that nonprofit websites are fundamentally different than most business websites. Because
Definitely.
most for profit entities are serving more of a singular purpose, they're serving fewer audiences. Nonprofits generally do have at least 2 audiences, to the point Carly's bringing up. A lot of the folks we work with could rattle off 5, 6, 10 audiences that they're trying to reach with their
Yeah.
website. So the first thing that I always recommend is getting really clear on your primary audiences for the website. And as challenging as it is, we push folks to try and limit that to 1 or 2 primary audiences maximum. Now,
Okay.
I know it is super difficult to do that, and I get why folks want to try to speak to more audiences than that, because you don't want to leave people out. You don't want to reduce the number of potential supporters that would engage. But what a lot of organizations run into is the problem of trying to speak to everyone and resonating with no one.
Right.
And so the clearer you can get on your primary audiences, the better. And when you're thinking through those primary audiences, hone in on a few things. First, once you've identified who they are, what questions do they have? What challenges are they sort of wrestling with that would bring them to your website in the
Right.
first place? So
And
that's
in
just
some
kind of
cases, that
understanding.
can be really extreme things, right? If we're thinking
Yeah,
about homeless shelters or we're thinking about domestic violence situations, people are going to those websites with extreme needs and immediate needs.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and even to that, in those examples, getting really clear on whether the folks that you serve are an audience for your website, or is it more about drumming up support? And a lot of organizations are trying to do both, but some actually, as they start peeling back the layers of those onions, say, well, you know, that's just not the way that a lot of our program participants find us. Maybe they're
Right.
finding us through a case manager or a referral source. in which case the whole website doesn't need to speak to them. We have a sort of particular landing page that needs
Right.
to speak to that audience. So again, just getting really clear on who your audience is, who your website is for, what audiences you're trying to reach, how they're going to find your website, what motivation sort of is bringing them to the site, and then connect that to what we call your differentiated value, which is just how do you stand out from
Right.
other organizations that do something similar? Like you have some sort of secret sauce. You have something that makes you uniquely positioned to help folks in ways that other organizations can't, or a unique positioning that will speak to a donor or a volunteer. Make sure that you're really leading with those messages. Just how are you different? Why would someone support you or get involved with your movement instead of all the other ways they could go
Right.
about answering those questions or solving those challenges? And then the final piece is getting really clear on the logical next step for those folks. And I recommend doing this on a page by page level. So you're creating a new page. Who's the audience for that page? What questions, what challenges do they need answered by the end of that page, by the time they're done reading it?
Mm. Hmm.
And then again, what's your differentiated value? What's your unique take on that topic? And then what's the next step for them? That's going to be your call to action. That's going to be what you're going to try and drive them to do once they've engaged with that page. And I would really push folks to think about that primary action from the perspective of the visitor, not you as the organization. Because it's really easy to say, like, oh, it's making a donation. We need all our visitors to make a donation. But think about the audience for that page, what brought them to that page, to your site. Is making a donation the most logical next step for them? Or is there
Right.
some interim step where they're getting involved in some other way, or they're sharing a story as a first step? And then you can find other ways to deepen that relationship and get them ultimately to the point of wanting to support your cause. But as you start kind of viewing page content through these lenses, I find a lot of times it helps bring some clarity to not only the content that you're writing, but also the calls to action that we're promoting within the pages of our site.
I think that's it's a really good reminder too that sometimes we might need to do a little bit of auditing on our website and maybe let some people who are not working at your mission, who are not fully aware of everything you do, maybe they should take a look and let you know where things might feel unclear or where there might be some more questions. Because I know, like, I have been in a position before where I'm like, how can I make this any more clear? Like it's so obvious to me because I know exactly what we do and I know the impact we're having, but not everyone is going to understand, which is where storytelling can come into play. But um, yeah, making sure that people can really find like the context, that is super important. It's a really
Yep.
good point. But speaking of auditing a website, we did have another question from Jenna that I thought fit pretty organically here. And Jenna
Yeah.
said, we're trying to streamline our website and reduce the total number of pages. What is the most successful way to audit a website? Whew, great question.
It's a great question. I love that Jenna is thinking about this too. Most organizations end up just adding
Yeah,
pages over
more,
time
more,
and
more.
never, right. We've started to call these Frankensites because different pages just kind of get bolted in over time. And the analogy I like to use
That
is
can be
think
like your
about
Halloween costume. You're gonna be a Frankenstein
a
or
Frankenstein. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm trying to picture what that would even. I'll figure it out. I got time. I can involve my kiddos.
yeah.
They love Halloween more than probably any other holiday. Um, so when it comes to auditing your site, a few tips here. The first is more of like a process related tip. I recommend trying to carve out time to do this on some sort of regular cadence. So if you can put in a time annually to audit your website, it can be a really nice place to start. Um, a lot of folks do this sort of after the holidays, maybe after giving season when maybe things are a little bit quieter.
Right.
Um, and really what we're looking for with an audit, we want it to be actionable. We want it to be comprehensive. We want to make sure it covers the whole website, and we want it to be as efficient as we can possibly make it, so that it doesn't be something. You don't want it to be something that takes a weeks to get through your whole site. And so typically what I recommend, try and do it in the fewest number of sittings you possibly can,
Mm.
where you're carving out maybe an afternoon, read through at least your highest priority pages. You don't necessarily have to read your entire site. If you have a really big site, maybe that's not feasible. But start with your most trafficked pages and start with your most important pages to those conversion paths we talked about before. Just like what are
Right.
the key pages that visitors need to engage with in order to ultimately take meaningful actions on your website.
This is
And
such a good point. I think
well,
especially
yeah,
because sometimes we will be in positions where, okay, for example, like even something as small as someone at your organization's title changes. Now you need to
yes,
go boot. Now you have to go look at your website and say, okay, where have I listed titles? Where do I have everybody's, where do I have maybe someone's headshot and quote over here and I've quoted them at this title, something like that. So this is, you're only going to do yourself favors when you do inevitably need to change language in some way. Again, it's something as small as a title, but maybe it's something as big as you are rebranding a program. And now
yeah,
you have all
absolutely.
these pages that may or may not people may or may not be looking at that have kind of this old language that you're not using anymore. Um,
Yep.
it's really important to go through this process so you don't find yourself in a mountain of kind of work when you are deciding to do some sort of rebranding.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the way I kind of think about it is, let's say you're writing a book, right? Your website is your book. If you wrote a book one page at a time over many years, there's no way that book would tie together. There's no
No.
way that character development would make sense. There's no way it would engage your reader. But that's exactly what we do with our websites all the time. Is we
Yeah.
write that book page by page over many years. And so taking that step back, reading all the at least the most important pages of your site can just help you again tie that sort of narrative through your site and make sure that the way that visitors are engaging with it is ultimately going to compel them to lean in a little bit, give you a little bit more of their time, and hopefully ultimately get engaged. I know we're a little hot on time. We have a resource about website audits that I can also share. It's a template that folks can download if they want it. It's a long kind of video walkthrough of how we audit. It's actually our whole process for auditing websites.
It's
So
the cheat sheet.
yeah, right. I mean, adapt it to your needs. If you have any questions about it, don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to nerd out on auditing sites. Let me grab that real quick. I can drop it in the chat. I'll make sure I chat it out to everyone this time.
Awesome. And then I think with our okay, so let's answer one more question because we did get a question about this in the chat as well as several in registration, but we talked a little bit about SEO. What do we think I know like that's something I have to think about a lot in my role as well as the marketing director here, but
Yeah.
how can I implement SEO optimization on my website? So let's think of a nonprofit that has maybe never even heard of SEO. What's maybe like the first few things that they can consider to start getting on those Google pages? Because everybody, you got to be getting on those Google pages, right?
You gotta be. Yeah. I am actually really curious to get your take on this, Carly. I think sometimes people think I'm sort of an SEO skeptic when I talk about SEO. And I am not. I love SEO. I think SEO is amazing. I would sort of call myself maybe a little bit more of an SEO realist.
Uh-huh.
I think the thing, it sort of depends on the organization and how established your website is.
Yeah.
If you're a new organization who's just getting started, I generally would recommend thinking about other channels that are probably going to be more effective at you driving at least short-term traffic to your website.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, SEO is much more of a long game. It's just going to be something that takes a lot of time to see not only Google or search engine in general, but Google's the behemoth, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take time for search engines to understand what your site is about. And it's also going to take time for you to build up what's called domain authority, just the strength of your overall domain. Best way to do that is generate inbound links and
Mhm.
earn coverage on authoritative websites. It's just really hard for a brand new website to compete against much more popular sites that are showing up um, in Google results already. So a lot of times, again, I don't, not to discredit SEO, just think of it more as a long game. The quickest ways to do it, again, circle back to the questions that you get asked all the
Yeah.
time about your organization, and then try to create the absolute best resource on the internet when it comes to answering that question.
Yeah.
Um, SEO is hard to do without doing keyword research and getting sort of into the technical weeds. There's also a lot of sort of technical stuff that needs to happen for you to rank for search engines. But from a content creation standpoint, that's usually what I recommend is start with the most pressing questions that you get asked and just try to create the most comprehensive, helpful content on the internet for that particular.
100%. You're exactly right. I also would say on top of that, when it comes to kind of quick things that you can do to for SEO, is you really this is going to sound like maybe I'm anti creativity, which is not true, but we need to make sure we're naming our pages things that are things people actually search. So these are things people are looking for. So let's maybe reduce the creativity and kind of all the crazy branding in some cases. And this it's okay that this is your how to donate page. It's okay that this is your about my mission page or our founder story page. These are things people are going to type in. They're going to type in your nonprofit and then maybe donate. We got to make sure they get to your donate page from that, not your way of giving page or your what like there are things that people will type in that will get them to your website. So be cognizant of what people are realistically going to search when they're looking for you. And that also could be something like I used to work at the Breast Cancer Coalition. It could be something like breast cancer research in my area, or it could be a breast cancer support group in my area. And like you said, now maybe that page on my website says breast cancer support groups in Rochester, New York, or wherever. These are things that people are going to type in that will get them to your website. And theoretically, if they type in exactly what you call your page, theoretically, they're going to get to your website. So that is kind of I don't even know if that's like a hot tip. I feel like it's just something that maybe sometimes we don't think about.
Yep, I totally agree.
All right. In that case, though, okay, so we have really quickly, Lisa asked in the chat, David, do you have any examples of what other ways you could use to drive traffic? Okay, so instead of search engines.
Yeah. So Lisa, it's going to depend a little bit on your organization and sort of the relationships you have in the community, but leveraging relationships can be a big one. So thinking about your partners, thinking about, if you're doing maybe like events with others in the community or you have sponsors, thinking about ways that you can sort of get in front of their audiences can be a great way of driving traffic. I mean, social media can definitely be a way to raise awareness and get some people coming to your website. One tool that I recommend checking out is called SparkToro. I can share a link to that too. Let me see if I can type and grab it while I am talking. But this tool is super cool. They have a free plan. I think I chatted that out to everyone. It lets you do audience research and see which channels your audience is more active in.
Mhm.
So I'm also just a big fan of their marketing in general. They're a really cool team over there. But check them out. That's also a way to see just, what sandboxes are your audiences playing in and how do you kind of show up for them in meaningful ways.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, which of course means that I need to ask you, what is the number one next step that people watching today can do to make their website just a little bit better in terms of getting more donations or getting more traffic? What do you think?
Um, this is maybe going to be a little bit less concrete. It's more of just like a mindset shift, but something that we talk a lot about is this idea of when in doubt, leave it out. If you are
Okay.
not sure if you should add that item to your navigation or that piece to your homepage, try your best not to include it. Because, like I said before, everything you add steals attention from everything else that's already there. And so, the more you can streamline things, the more you can really focus on that most important message that you want your visitors to walk away with, the better.
I love it. I think that's really great. That's for everything, right? Like, let's make sure our social media posts are exactly what we're looking to say. Let's make sure our stories are concrete and short and ready for people to consume. I think that's a great tip.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you all so much for coming today. I feel like that 60 minutes really zoomed right by. But everyone will get the recording here. Everyone that registered will get the recording. As a reminder, we are partners. David and I do love working together. So if you already work with Wired Impact, but you want to learn more about MemoryFox, you can go ahead. And what we're going to do for you is we're going to give you a 10% donation back when you become a MemoryFox storyteller. That is because we have an equitable pricing model. So definitely find time to meet with our team and check that out. And then if you are a MemoryFox storyteller and you're here in the room, we have a special offer from Wired Impact, and you can get 50% off your one-time project fee. So, two links there. These will be included in the follow-up email. Thank you all so much for coming. David, thanks for so much. I learned so much. I'm ready to go make some changes to my navigation on my website personally. Any final thoughts?
No, just thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm a huge fan of MemoryFox, the ethical storytelling report that you put out, and it means a lot to be able to spend some time with y'all. So appreciate you having me and hanging around for the hour to talk nonprofit websites.
Hey, we'll definitely do it again sometime because we have
That
about
sounds good.
100 more questions that we could have
That's right.
answered. So, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next one.
Hi, everyone.